The sleeping giant, the Viridian Empire, stretched across 42 star systems, a testament to conquest and military supremacy. For 3 centuries, the Viridians had expanded their territory through calculated aggression, absorbing smaller civilizations into their domain. Their reptilian forms, covered in iridescent scales that shifted from deep purple to silver, had become synonymous with power across the known galaxy. When they spoke in the Galactic Assembly, others listened. When they made demands, others complied. Commander Thrace stood aboard the bridge of the Sovereign Talon, his flagship and pride of the Viridian Armada. Through the viewport, he observed the small human colony on the planet, designated as Frontier's Edge. The settlement appeared peaceful, almost naive in its lack of substantial defenses. Agricultural domes dotted the landscape, solar arrays glittered in the sunlight, and a modest spaceport handled civilian traffic. Intelligence reports indicated approximately 3 million humans called this world home, most of them families who had left Earth seeking new opportunities among the stars. Thrace's tactical officer, a younger Viridian named Krell, approached with a data tablet. The preliminary scans were complete. The colony had minimal defensive capabilities, just a handful of patrol ships designed for asteroid monitoring and emergency rescue operations. No military installations, no weapon platforms, no shield generators capable of withstanding a concentrated assault. The commander had received his orders directly from the Viridian High Command. Humanity had refused to grant the Empire access to 3 resource-rich systems along their shared border. The humans had been polite but firm, citing galactic law and their sovereign rights. Such defiance could not stand. The Empire needed to send a message, not just to humanity, but to every species watching. Weakness invited aggression. Hesitation bred contempt. Thrace gave the order without hesitation. The Sovereign Talon and its escort fleet opened fire. Energy weapons lanced down through the atmosphere, striking the agricultural centers first. Explosions bloomed across the surface as structures vaporized under the assault. The modest defensive ships that scrambled to respond were destroyed within minutes, their hulls torn apart by weapons far beyond their capacity to withstand. The attack lasted 4 hours. By the time Thrace ordered the ceasefire, Frontier's Edge was a graveyard. 70% of the colony lay in ruins. Casualty estimates exceeded 2 million. The survivors huddled in emergency shelters, their communications arrays destroyed, their hope for rescue fading with each passing moment. Thrace recorded his message for the Galactic Assembly with the burning colony visible. Behind him, the Viridian Empire had demonstrated its resolve. Humanity would withdraw from the disputed systems, or more colonies would share Frontier's Edge's fate. He transmitted the ultimatum and departed, confident that the humans would recognize their position and surrender. What Thrace did not know was that his attack had triggered something humanity had sworn never to unleash again. Captain Elena Rodriguez received the distress call from Frontier's Edge while commanding the civilian transport vessel New Dawn. She was 3 systems away, ferrying supplies to another colony, when the fragmented transmission cut through the normal Kung chatter. The words were broken, interrupted by static and the sounds of destruction, but their meaning was clear. They were under attack. Massive casualties. No defenses. Send help. Elena changed course immediately, pushing her ship's engines beyond recommended limits. The New Dawn was not built for speed, but she coaxed every bit of velocity from the aging vessel. Her crew, mostly young volunteers who had known nothing but peace their entire lives, worked frantically to prepare for whatever they might find. When they arrived at Frontier's Edge, the scope of the devastation left Elena speechless. She had studied history, had learned about Earth's violent past in the mandatory education courses, but seeing the results of modern warfare firsthand was different. Cities had been reduced to craters. The orbital infrastructure hung in pieces. twisted metal slowly tumbling through space. Emergency beacons pulsed weakly from scattered survivor groups. Elena coordinated rescue efforts with other civilian ships that had responded to the distress call. They pulled survivors from the wreckage, provided medical care, distributed food and water. But the entire time, Elena saw the looks in people's eyes. Not just grief and shock, but something else. Something that worried her. Anger was building. Questions were being asked. Why did humanity have no real military? Why were peaceful colonies left defenseless? When would Earth do something? The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly convened 48 hours after the attack. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in the massive chamber that orbited a neutral star. The humans sent Ambassador David Park, a veteran diplomat who had served the Galactic Assembly for 30 years. David had always advocated for peaceful solutions, for cooperation over conflict, for dialogue over demands. Commander Thrace presented his case first. The attack on Frontier's Edge had been regrettable but necessary. Humanity needed to understand that defying the Viridian Empire carried consequences. The disputed systems would be absorbed into Viridian territory. In exchange, the Empire would provide financial compensation for the colony's reconstruction. It was a generous offer, considering the circumstances. Several species voiced support for the Viridian position. The Krill Consortium, whose trading interests aligned with Viridian expansion, praised the commander's restraint in limiting the attack to a single colony. The Metherian hives, who had submitted to Viridian dominance decades earlier, remained silent, their representative refusing to make eye contact with anyone. David Park stood at the human delegation's position, his weathered face revealing nothing of his inner turmoil. When he spoke, his voice carried across the chamber with unexpected steel. The Galactic Assembly operated on principles of law and mutual respect. The Viridian attack had violated every treaty and agreement that bound their community together. Humanity demanded justice, demanded reparations, and demanded assurances that such atrocities would never occur again. Thrace laughed, a sound harsh and mocking. Humanity demanded? With what leverage? The human species controlled 53 colonies across 19 systems. Their fleet consisted of cargo vessels, passenger ships, and science explorers. They had no battleships, no weapons of war, no capacity to enforce their demands. The galaxy respected strength, and humanity had demonstrated none. David turned to address the full assembly, his gaze sweeping across the diverse representatives. There was something about humanity that most species did not understand, he said, a period in their history that they rarely discussed. 500 years ago, Earth had been unified not through peace, but through exhaustion. Humanity had fought wars that nearly rendered their homeworld uninhabitable. They had developed weapons of such destructive power that their very existence threatened the species' survival. When Earth finally achieved peace, it was not because humans had forgotten how to wage war. It was because they remembered too well. They had made a collective choice to lock away their military knowledge, to redirect their efforts toward exploration and creation rather than destruction. They had hoped to find a galaxy that shared their values, that respected life and pursued cooperation. The chamber fell silent as David's words sank in. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably, sensing something ominous in the human ambassador's tone. David continued, his voice growing colder. Humanity had kept one promise to themselves for 5 centuries. They would never again unleash the full measure of their capacity for warfare unless given no other choice. The Viridian Empire had just eliminated that choice. By attacking Frontier's Edge, by killing millions of innocent civilians, by threatening further violence, the Viridians had awakened something that had been deliberately put to sleep. Thrace rose from his position, his scales flushing with anger. Empty threats from a species of farmers and merchants meant nothing. The Viridian Armada numbered 15,000 warships. Human bravado would not save them from the Empire's might. David looked directly at the Viridian commander, and for the first time, Thrace saw something in the human's eyes that gave him pause. It was not fear or desperation. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that came from knowledge the commander did not possess. Earth had already given the order. David said quietly. The Remembrance archives were being opened. 500 years of forbidden knowledge, of suppressed technology, of military theory and weapons development that humanity had deliberately abandoned was being retrieved. Every design, every strategy, every lesson learned from centuries of warfare was being studied and implemented. The human ambassador provided specific details that made several species representatives gasp. Humanity possessed theoretical designs for weapons that could sterilize planets, engines that could propel ships at velocities approaching light speed, artificial intelligence systems capable of coordinating fleet actions with perfect precision. All of this technology had been locked away, deemed too dangerous for a species that wanted to join the galactic community as peaceful partners. But peace required willing participants. The Viridians had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs. Asterisk. David transmitted a message to the Assembly's central display. It showed Earth's major shipyards, facilities that had built nothing but civilian vessels for half a millennium. In the footage, those shipyards were being retooled. New construction frames were rising. Designs that looked nothing like the gentle curves of human civilian ships were taking shape. These vessels were angular, aggressive, built with purposes that required no explanation. The message included a timeline. Within 6 months, humanity would field a military fleet. Not a defensive force, but an armada designed using 500 years of suppressed military innovation, combined with modern manufacturing and computational capabilities. The Viridian Empire would discover exactly what they had awakened. The THRAC. He watched the footage with growing unease. His intelligence reports had dismissed human military potential as negligible. But looking at those shipyard images, at the cold determination in Ambassador Park's expression, the commander felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest. Doubt. Assembly dissolved into chaos as species began arguing about appropriate responses, about treaty obligations, about the implications of humanity's revelation. Some called for sanctions against both parties. Others demanded the Viridians withdraw and apologize. A few quietly began calculating how this shift in galactic power dynamics might affect their own positions. David Park gathered his materials and prepared to depart. Before leaving, he approached the Viridian delegation. Thrace met him at the chamber's edge, the two leaders facing each other across a cultural divide that had just become infinitely more dangerous. The human ambassador spoke softly, ensuring only Thrace could hear. 500 years ago, humanity nearly destroyed itself because they became too proficient at warfare. They learned to kill efficiently, to wage war without mercy, to reduce combat to cold mathematics and engineering. They stopped not because they lost, but because they won so completely that nothing remained worth fighting for. David's expression held no anger, only a terrible sadness. The Viridian Empire had forced humanity to remember lessons they had hoped to never need again. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences emerged from this confrontation, Thrace should understand one fundamental truth. Humanity had not been weak. They had been choosing kindness. There was a profound difference between those two states, and the Viridians were about to learn that difference in the harshest way possible. Commander. Thrace returned to the Sovereign Talon with his confidence shaken. He reviewed the footage from Earth's shipyards repeatedly, consulted with his military analysts, studied what little information existed about humanity's pre-peace era. The more he learned, the more his concern grew. The galaxy was about to change. The sleeping giant had been struck, and now it was waking up. And when it fully opened its eyes, the Viridian Empire would understand exactly what they had unleashed. Asterisk, what lies beneath? The remembrance. Archives lay beneath the Tibetan plateau, carved into ancient rock that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. For 500 years, the facility had remained sealed, protected by security systems that had never been tested, guarded by protocols that had never been activated. The last person to walk these corridors had been Chief Archivist Helena Vasquez, who had locked the final vault door in 2247 and taken the access codes to her grave dot now. In 2747, the doors were opening again. Admiral Marcus Chun stood at the entrance, watching as decades of dust fell away from massive steel barriers. The pneumatic systems groaned as they activated for the first time in centuries, pushing aside tons of reinforced plating. Behind him, a team of military historians, weapons engineers, and systems analysts waited in silence. They all understood the weight of this moment. Humanity was about to confront its own dark reflection. Marcus was 73 years old, a career officer who had spent his entire life commanding cargo convoys and overseeing peaceful exploration missions. He had never fired a weapon in anger, had never ordered an attack, had never seen combat outside of historical simulations. Yet Earth's unified command had chosen him to lead the revival of humanity's military capability. They said it was because he understood restraint, because he remembered why these archives existed in the first place. The inner vault revealed itself as the final barriers withdrew. The chamber stretched hundreds of meters in every direction, filled with data storage systems of every generation. Holographic crystals sat beside magnetic tape archives. Quantum storage matrices rested near ancient hard drives encased in protective foam. Humanity had preserved everything, unable to destroy the knowledge, but unwilling to use it. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the team's lead historian, stepped forward with her scanning equipment. She had studied the pre-peace era her entire career, had written her doctoral thesis on the psychology of the final conflicts. But being here, standing in the actual archive, seeing the physical manifestation of humanity's capacity for destruction, left her momentarily speechless. The first systems they activated contained ship designs. The holographic displays flickered to life, showing schematics for vessels that bore no resemblance to anything humanity had built in 5 centuries. These were not ships designed for exploration or commerce. Every line, every angle, every component existed for a single purpose: to destroy other ships as efficiently as possible. Marcus studied a design labeled the Valkyrie-class destroyer. The vessel was 2 kilometers long, powered by a matter-antimatter reactor that could generate enough energy to supply a small city. Its primary weapon was a magnetic accelerator cannon capable of firing projectiles at 30% light speed. Secondary systems included nuclear torpedo launchers, directed energy weapons, and something called a graviton pulse generator that could disrupt enemy ship systems from thousands of kilometers away. Specifications indicated that a single Valkyrie-class destroyer could engage and defeat an entire conventional fleet. The design notes included tactical recommendations, optimal firing solutions, and casualty projections with clinical precision. Humanity's ancestors had turned warfare into an exact science, and the results were terrifying. Dr. Okonkwo moved to another terminal, accessing files on weapon systems. Her hands shook slightly as she read through the documentation. Humanity had developed kinetic bombardment platforms capable of destroying cities from orbit, biological weapons that could be tailored to specific genetic markers, electromagnetic pulse devices that could render entire planets technologically inert, nanite swarms that could disassemble enemy infrastructure at the molecular level. There were weapons that had never been built, theoretical designs deemed too dangerous even during the final conflicts. One file described something called a stellar collapser, a device that could destabilize a star and turn it into a supernova. Another detailed quantum entanglement bombs that could affect their targets retroactively, erasing ships from existence before they had even been built. Marcus forced himself to look away from the displays. This was the knowledge humanity had locked away. This was what they had been capable of, what they had chosen to suppress. He understood now why the archives had been sealed. Not because the technology was difficult to recreate, but because knowing it existed made using it tempting. A younger officer, Commander Lisa Zhang, accessed the tactical database. 5 centuries of warfare doctrine, strategy guides, and combat simulations filled the screens. She found files on fleet coordination, psychological warfare, resource denial tactics, and something called scorched earth protocols. The documentation was exhaustive, detailing every possible scenario, from small unit tactics to civilization-ending total war. One file caught her attention. The Cascade Doctrine. She opened it and felt her stomach tighten as she read. The Cascade Doctrine outlined how to systematically destroy an enemy's capacity to wage war by targeting their infrastructure in a specific sequence. First, eliminate their ability to communicate. Second, destroy their production facilities. Third, neutralize their political leadership. Fourth, break their population's will to resist. The document included timelines, resource requirements, and expected casualty rates for each phase. This was not warfare as honorable combat. This was warfare as industrial process, as cold calculation, as the complete subjugation of an opponent through overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency. Marcus called his team together after 6 hours of initial survey. They gathered in a conference room adjacent to the main vault, surrounded by 5 centuries of forbidden knowledge. Every face showed the same expression, a mixture of awe, horror, and grim understanding. Earth's unified command wanted results immediately. The Viridian Empire had given humanity 6 months before launching their next attack, this time targeting multiple colonies simultaneously. 6 months to remember what they had spent 5 centuries trying to forget. 6 months to build a military force capable of standing against 15,000 enemy warships. Dr. Okonkwo presented her preliminary assessment. The technology was old but sound. The fundamental principles of physics had not changed. What humanity had locked away 500 years ago would work just as well today. Better, actually, because modern manufacturing techniques, computational power, and material science would make these ancient designs even more effective. They could build the ships. They could recreate the weapons. They could implement the tactical doctrines. The question was not capability, but consequence. Once humanity remembered how to wage war, could they ever forget again? Marcus made his decision. They would prioritize defensive capabilities first. Ships designed to protect human colonies, weapon systems meant to deter aggression, strategic doctrines focused on minimizing casualties. They would use the archive's knowledge, but they would apply it with the wisdom of 5 centuries of peace. The shipyards of Earth, Mars, and the Jovian moons began their transformation within days. Civilian construction facilities were retooled for military production. Engineers studied the ancient designs and adapted them using modern technology. The first keel was laid for a Valkyrie-class destroyer within 2 weeks. 50 more followed within a month. The construction progressed with stunning speed. Humanity's industrial capacity, built up over 5 centuries of peaceful expansion, now turned toward military production with the same efficiency that had built their trading empire. Automated factories operated around the clock. Resource extraction from asteroid belts increased tenfold. Raw materials flowed through supply chains optimized over generations. Marcus established his command center on Earth's orbital station Unity 1. From here, he coordinated the military buildup while maintaining communication with the Galactic Assembly. Other species watched humanity's transformation with mixed reactions. Some offered quiet support. Others expressed concern about a new military power emerging in the galaxy. The Viridians dismissed the entire effort as futile, claiming their numerical superiority would overwhelm any human resistance. 4 months after opening the Remembrance Archives, the first completed warship launched from Mars Orbital Shipyard. The UHS Defiance was a Valkyrie-class destroyer, exactly as the ancient design specified, but enhanced with modern systems. Her hull was composed of advanced composite armor that could withstand temperatures exceeding those found in stellar coronas. Her reactor generated enough power to supply a planet. Her weapons could engage targets from distances measured in light seconds. Captain Jennifer Watanabe assumed command of the Defiance, making her the first human military officer in 5 centuries to command a true warship. She was 42 years old, had served on cargo vessels her entire career, and had volunteered for this assignment, knowing it would change everything about her life. Her crew of 300 had all made similar choices, leaving behind peaceful occupations to become warriors because their species needed them. The shakedown cruise revealed capabilities that exceeded even the optimistic projections. The Defiance accelerated smoothly to velocities that would have torn apart civilian vessels. Her weapons performed flawlessly, destroying target drones with terrifying precision. Her defensive systems tracked and neutralized incoming fire with the cold efficiency of the artificial intelligence coordinating her responses. By the time 6 months had passed, humanity had constructed 200 warships of various classes. Valkyrie-class destroyers formed the backbone of the fleet. They were supported by smaller frigate-class vessels for screening and reconnaissance, larger cruiser-class ships for sustained combat operations, and a handful of dreadnought-class vessels that dwarfed everything else humanity had ever built. The Viridian Empire launched their second attack on schedule, exactly 6 months after destroying Frontier's Edge. Commander Thrace led a fleet of 500 warships to the human colony of New Terra, expecting to repeat his earlier success. Intelligence reports indicated humanity had built some military vessels, but the numbers seemed insignificant compared to Viridian strength. The Viridian fleet emerged from faster than light travel at New Terra's edge and immediately detected the human presence. 50 warships waited in defensive positions around the colony world. Thrace felt a moment of satisfaction. 50 against 500. The outcome was predetermined. What Thrace did not know was that Marcus had spent 4 months studying Viridian tactics, analyzing their weapon systems, and identifying their weaknesses. The ancient tactical databases had provided insights into fighting numerically superior forces. Humanity's ancestors had developed these doctrines through brutal experience, and Marcus was about to demonstrate their effectiveness. The Viridians advanced in a standard attack formation, their ships clustered together for mutual support. It was tactically sound against most opponents, allowing them to concentrate fire and protect vulnerable vessels. Against humanity's revived military doctrine, it was a fatal mistake. Marcus gave the order from his flagship, the UHS Relentless. The human fleet did not engage directly. Instead, they launched long-range kinetic projectiles, hundreds of them, accelerated to velocities that made them nearly impossible to intercept. The projectiles were simple tungsten rods wrapped in ablative coating, cheap to manufacture and devastatingly effective. The Viridian formation took the first volley across their entire front line. Kinetic energy converted to thermal energy as the projectiles punched through shields designed to deflect energy weapons. Dozens of Viridian ships suffered catastrophic damage, their hulls breached, their systems failing. The survivors broke formation, trying to scatter and present more difficult targets. That was when the human destroyers struck. They had been waiting at high velocity on trajectories that brought them through the disrupted Viridian formation at oblique angles. The Defiance led the charge, her magnetic accelerator cannon firing continuously. Each shot precisely, calculated by targeting computers that predicted enemy movements with eerie accuracy. Captain Watanabe watched her tactical display with grim satisfaction. Every lesson from the Remembrance archives was being validated. Superior numbers meant nothing if the enemy could not bring those numbers to bear effectively. Concentration of force became a liability when fighting opponents who could strike from unexpected vectors. Traditional shield technology failed against kinetic weapons traveling at relativistic speeds. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it ended, the Viridian fleet had lost 200 ships. The human fleet had lost 5. Commander Thrace, his flagship crippled and drifting, sent an emergency transmission requesting ceasefire. Marcus granted it, not out of mercy, but because the tactical objective had been achieved. New Terra was safe. The Viridians had been shown that humanity could defend itself. The footage from the battle reached the Galactic Assembly within hours. Species across the galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything they had anticipated. The smooth coordination, the precision targeting, the ruthless efficiency of the human attack shocked even species with proud warrior traditions. The Viridian High Command convened an emergency session. They reviewed the battle recordings repeatedly, trying to understand what had happened. Their analysts produced disturbing conclusions. Human weapons technology was not merely advanced. It was fundamentally different. While most species had developed energy-based weapons, humanity had perfected kinetic systems that bypassed conventional defenses. While others relied on centralized command structures, humans employed distributed artificial intelligence that adapted to changing battlefield conditions in real time. Most disturbing was the tactical sophistication. The humans had not simply built warships. They had remembered how to think about warfare at every level, from individual ship maneuvers to fleet-wide strategy. 500 years of peace had not erased that knowledge. It had only been sleeping, waiting to be awakened. Thrace returned to Viridian Prime in disgrace. He stood before the High Command and delivered his assessment. Humanity was not the weak species they had appeared to be. The attack on Frontier's Edge had not intimidated them into submission. It had triggered a transformation that made them dangerous opponents. Continuing the war would be costly, perhaps catastrophically so. The High Command faced an impossible choice. Backing down would damage the Empire's reputation, potentially encouraging other species to resist Viridian demands. Continuing the war risked escalating conflict with an opponent whose true capabilities remained unknown. If humans possessed 200 warships now, how many would they have in another 6 months? And what other weapons might they pull from their archives? Marcus received the Viridian communication request 3 days after the battle. Commander Thrace appeared on the display, his scales dulled with stress, his posture no longer radiating confidence. The Viridian officer requested negotiations, carefully avoiding words like surrender or defeat, but the meaning was clear enough. The negotiations took place on neutral ground, a space station maintained by the Galactic Assembly. Marcus represented humanity, accompanied by Ambassador Park and a small delegation. Thrace led the Viridian representatives, supported by diplomats who looked distinctly uncomfortable. The terms were straightforward. The Viridian Empire would withdraw all claims to human territory. They would pay reparations for the destruction of Frontier's Edge, funding the colony's complete reconstruction. They would formally acknowledge human sovereignty over their existing systems and commit to peaceful relations. In exchange, humanity would cease military expansion and agree to proportional defensive forces. Thrace signed the agreement with visible reluctance. Before departing, he asked Marcus one question. Why had humanity hidden their true nature? Why pretend to be peaceful farmers when they possessed such devastating military capacity? Marcus considered his response carefully. Humanity had not pretended anything. They had genuinely pursued peace, genuinely hoped to find a galaxy that shared their values. The military capability had always existed, locked away, but never truly forgotten. The choice to revive it had been forced upon them, not something they had wanted. The Admiral looked directly at the Viridian commander. 500 years ago, humanity learned a terrible lesson. Being good at warfare did not make them strong. It made them dangerous, primarily to themselves. They had chosen to set aside their weapons because they understood that true strength came from building rather than destroying, from creating rather than taking. Thrace listened in silence, perhaps finally understanding the depth of his miscalculation. He had seen humanity's peaceful nature as weakness. He had not recognized it as a choice, one that could be unmade when circumstances demanded. The galaxy watched as humanity emerged from the conflict transformed. They had proven they could defend themselves, that attacking human colonies carried significant risks. But they had also demonstrated restraint, accepting negotiated peace rather than pressing their advantage. It was a delicate balance, showing teeth while not becoming predators. Marcus returned to Earth and stood once again at the entrance to the Remembrance Archives. The facility would remain open now, its contents available for study and implementation. Humanity could never return to the innocence of not knowing what they were capable of. They had been reminded, and that knowledge would shape their future. But perhaps, Marcus thought, that was not entirely bad. They had proven they could remember how to wage war without losing themselves to it. They had shown they could be dangerous when necessary, while remaining committed to peace when possible. The sleeping giant had awakened, but it had not become a monster. At least, not yet. The real test would come in the years ahead, as humanity navigated a galaxy that now saw them differently. They were no longer the harmless farmers and merchants. They were a species with fangs, even if those fangs remained sheathed most of the time. And somewhere in the archives, in files not yet fully explored, lay knowledge of even more terrible weapons. Things humanity had deemed too dangerous to use, even during their darkest wars. Marcus hoped those files would never need to be opened, but he knew now that hope was not enough. Vigilance was required. Memory was required. And the wisdom to know when to be fierce and when to be gentle would be humanity's greatest challenge. The sleeping giant was awake, and the galaxy would never forget what it had seen. Asterisk.